Hello, my name is Dr. James J. Christ. I am a licensed clinical psychologist and certified substance abuse counselor. And I'm here with you today for about 90 minutes on behalf of the Circle of Support, talking about ADHD and behavior management. Okay, so we'll be covering a lot of information. So I hope that I answer any questions that you might have had coming into it. I do have my contact information at the end of the slideshow. If you would like a copy of the slides for yourself, feel free to email me at drjchrist@aol.com. Again, that contact information is at the end of the slideshow presentation. All right, let me share this and start the show. Here we go from beginning. Okay. Very good. All right. Okay. ADHD and behavior management challenges and strategies for success. Okay. By way of introduction, we all know that the core ADHD symptoms of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity, we're all familiar with those. And we know how difficult it is to get kids and teens to perform many of the tasks of daily living that they find boring, especially. That is everything except video games, texting friends, surfing the web, chatting on Instagram with their friends or Discord, watching funny YouTube videos, watching sports, etc. And it's really hard to manage daily life without a great deal of frustration, both on your part and the part of your kids. So do any of these frustrations sound familiar to you? You think your kids don't appreciate how much extra work you put into helping them succeed, or no matter how many reminders you give them, they don't seem to be able to remember to even just do the most basic things routinely. You don't understand why picking up your clothes or wet towels off the floor of the bathroom is such a hard thing to remember to do. It may seem like you feel that you care more about your child's grades than they do. You may feel some resentment that a child with ADHD takes more time and attention than your other kids, which feels unfair to them. You may feel disrespected when your child raises his or her voice or argues with you. It may also seem like in the time it takes to argue over getting a task done, the task could have been already done, whether it's homework, chores, etc. Maybe finally, you may be very worried about your child's future, their ability to be successful in life. And you may think that they're not worried about that, but chances are they are, and they're just not really telling you. So I'm the author of ADHD, A Teenager's Guide. This was one of the first books I wrote. We've got a number of other self-help books for kids and teens. One of the things I believe very strongly with regard to mental health issues in kids is if you can teach them why they have problems and what they can do about those problems, especially when they're younger, the hope is that they can avoid some of the problems later on. I've written books on what to do when you're scared and worried, what to do when you're cranky and blue, getting along with your siblings, how to make friends and keep friends, what's the big deal about addictions? Again, all these things are designed to help kids understand. So some people are concerned about labeling kids, but very often when you have a label or a reason behind the struggle, it doesn't feel quite as bad to kids. And I think that's important to keep in mind. All right, let me give you an overview of the talk. I'm going to review some of the basic ADHD symptoms and causes. We'll talk about problems associated with ADHD, how ADHD affects thinking and behavior management, how ADHD affects family and school functioning, which it does very clearly. We're going to talk about behavioral strategies that you can use to successfully manage ADHD. I'll talk a little bit about the role of medication, some of the benefits and limitations. And finally, I will talk about some ways to deal with your own understandable frustrations. All right, so let's move on here. And before I forget, let me silence my cell phone so we don't get interrupted. There we go. Okay, so ADHD is a neurobiological disorder that impacts about 9% of children and teens today. It's not the result of bad parenting or too much TV or lack of discipline or lack of love. While any of these things can cause problems, of course, I think it's important to realize that ADHD is a genetically based condition, okay? It has neurological and biological roots. It's not a made-up disorder by drug companies to get them rich, as some would believe, Is it overdiagnosed? Sometimes. Is it underdiagnosed? Quite a bit. So often ADHD is not picked up until a person's life has become negatively affected. For example, for adults with ADHD that undiagnosed, it's not unusual for them to have multiple jobs because they can't keep a job. They get bored, they're impulsive, they quit without thinking about the consequences, et cetera. So it is very important to recognize that this is a real disorder and that we have effective treatments as well. So, let's see. So as I review some of the core symptoms, I want you to just give some thought as to how each of them might affect parenting. Okay. So actually, we'll go back to that in a second. So in terms of inattention, there are a number of core symptoms involving trouble paying close attention to details, which makes it more likely to make mistakes. Think careless mistakes in math, reading, writing, etc. Trouble sustaining or shifting attention or in tasks or play, or in conversations, in class, during reading. Some people think that we should have called ADHD attention shifting disorder because kids with ADHD can focus on things that they really enjoy for reasons I'll talk about in a bit. But it's often shifting attention to what they're doing to what you want them to do that causes problems. Not seeming to listen or when spoken to, their mind seems elsewhere. Again, it's not that they are intentionally ignoring you, though in some cases that may be the case. But they're thinking about something else. They're not focusing on you. So it doesn't even register. They don't follow through on instructions, failing to finish chores or schoolwork, or starting a task but losing focus. Trouble organizing tasks and activities, avoiding or disliking tasks that require sustained mental effort, such as schoolwork or homework or chores, things that are not fun. Losing things. You don't pay attention to where you left them. Being easily distracted. Other things grab their attention. Classic example is you tell a child to clean their room and, put them in their room and, 30 minutes, an hour later, you come back and they're playing with some little toy, totally oblivious to what the task they were supposed to be doing. And again, often forgetful in daily activities. In terms of hyperactivity, this is fidgeting with tapping hands, feet, bouncing your legs, squirming in your seat, things like that. Kids with hyperactivity are more easily diagnosed because it's more obvious, comes to your attention earlier. Getting out of your seat when you're supposed to sit still, whether at school or at dinner time. We've got running around or climbing a lot. And for teenagers, hyperactivity is going to take more of a restlessness, like an internal restlessness, just not feeling like they can sit still. It could include running around, climbing a lot, trouble playing quietly, distracting other people, being on the go, feeling like you're driven by a motor, talking a lot, making it harder for others to have to listen to them, and this causes this problem socially. Impulsivity has to do with like blurting out answers before questions are completed, starting tasks before instructions are completed, not being able to wait your turn, and interrupting others, butting into conversations, using people's things without asking, making decisions without thinking about the consequences, whether it's putting off homework or tasks, or as a teenager, maybe using drugs or skipping school without thinking about the long-term consequences of that, or posting things online that they shouldn't be posting online. That could be a whole other talk. And all three of these areas cause problems in functioning in multiple areas. So let me talk a little bit about brain functioning. Okay, differences in brain functioning are considered to be a root cause of ADHD. Okay, so here's a diagram of the brain. The frontal lobes of the brain are the parts of the brain that are involved in higher level reasoning. It's part of what makes us human. Involves making judgments, paying attention, controlling emotional responses, analyzing situations. This prefrontal cortex develops last in life. In people with ADHD, it's considered to be delayed even more, but we think that the brain doesn't fully mature till around age 25. And this again may be a little delayed with kids with ADHD, so they have a much harder time staying focused and controlling their impulses. The get up and go part of brain functioning doesn't function so well with people with ADHD. And again, people will tell me, but my kid focuses so well on things he likes. Why is this the case? Activities that are intrinsically rewarding to kids, they can focus more. That has to do with the level of dopamine, which we'll talk about in a second. But it's not like it's just because they can focus when they want to. It's if something is highly rewarding or highly stimulating, it compensates for the lack of motivation that is present for almost all other tasks. All right. So dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It is a chemical in the brain that is involved in the pleasure centers. It's what makes things rewarding. Okay. And I'm just going to give you a very brief overview, but I do think it's important to understand this a little bit. So these are neurons in your brain. These are nerve cells in the brain. And so what happens when your brain is active, trying to do something, for example, sending a message, you have a sending neuron here, and that goes to the receiving neuron. And so these little circle things in between, that's the neural synapse. So what happens is the message goes here, turns into a chemical, stimulates the next neuron, and then gets absorbed back into the original neuron, the preceding neuron, okay? So what happens, and this is, again, dopamine is one of the neurotransmitters that makes things rewarding. So if you have a lack of dopamine or a lower level, things are less rewarding than they would otherwise be. They don't have the natural good feeling that most of us may have when we finish a task, for example, okay? So one of the things we know that Ritalin, for example, one of the medications used to treat ADHD, can block the dopamine transporter. So what it actually means is that it stays activating the next neuron. So it makes it work harder and helps make up for some of that deficit. Dopamine's hard to find. Again, we think, and this is an oversimplification, but I think it helps to understand. The ADHD brain is always looking for dopamine, always looking for something to make them feel good. And unfortunately, feeling good about conquering monsters or shooting others on video games feels much more rewarding and satisfying than making one's bed, putting away clothes, doing activity. There's some people with ADHD are sensation seekers. It's a way of compensating for the level of dopamine. They need to do more exciting things to make up for that deficit. So this is another way of looking at brain functioning, SPECT imaging. And if you're interested in that, there's Dr. Daniel Amen, has a whole, you see him on public TV giving lectures. He's got a website, but basically what he does is he studies brain activity by how much glucose the brain is using. Glucose is the fuel that the brain uses and that our bodies use to fuel our activities. And so when you have a normal brain here on the left, when it's all filled in like that, that means the brain is functioning normally, that there's a lot of activity going on. With ADHD, what he finds is that there's a lack of activity. These are not holes in the brain. They're areas which the brain is less active. They're not using glucose, which means, again, they're not functioning as well. When you treat people with ADHD with a medication, for example, it increases those activity levels and allows people to compensate for the ADHD, helps them to focus better, control impulses, things like that. All right. So one of the things I want to mention here is people with ADHD often can hyperfocus or overfocus. If it's something that's very interesting to them, they are so zoned in, they tune everything else out. And you can see how that's going to cause problems in terms of listening to you, calling them down for dinner, or getting them to go to bed or do their homework, things like that. Okay. So, some people think that, see that as like a superpower. My superpower is the ability to hyperfocus. And you can think in certain situations, if you're hyperfocusing on a task that's interesting, maybe creating something or inventing something or being a video game tester, as a lot of kids say, oh, that's what I want to do. Again, it makes it easier for things to get done because you can be so focused. It's just hard to get there. Okay, so I mentioned the core symptoms of ADHD. These are some other things that are commonly associated with ADHD that aren't part of the diagnostic criteria exactly. So being bored easily, again, the dopamine deficit that I've mentioned. Executive functioning difficulties. So executive functioning, you probably have heard this term before. It's not a diagnosis per se that we use, but it's a set of mental skills that help you get things done. And these skills are controlled by the prefrontal cortex, as I mentioned earlier. Executive functioning helps you manage your time, pay attention, switch focus, start tasks, get all the materials necessary to start a task, to plan and organize, to remember the details, tune out distractions, estimate how long a task might take, okay? and avoid saying or doing the wrong thing. So it's not about, again, it's not just paying attention, it's shifting attention. And when executive functioning isn't working as well as it needs to, it creates problems with all sorts of things, as you can imagine. It's hard to get things done when your executive functioning is not as developed as it needs to be. Impaired working memory, which can cause trouble in math and reading. So working memory is the ability to keep something in your attention or your short-term memory long enough to do something with it, either to memorize it and commit it to long-term memory, or to perform a simple operation. Say you're doing a math problem and you have to carry numbers. If you have impaired working memory, you're not going to remember all the details. So what happens is your final product is inaccurate because you missed something, because it wasn't stuck there. Working memory also involves remembering a series of tasks to do. You give a child 3 things to do, they're not going to remember the second and the third one. Maybe even not the first one if you're if you're unlucky with that. So what happens is your ability to keep focused on those other things, it just disappears because it doesn't stick. All right. Trouble with time management and prioritizing. People with ADHD tend to be oblivious to time. That's why they don't know how to prioritize. They don't understand, or they are not accurate in their prediction of how long something's going to take. This is one of the reasons why they procrastinate and they think, okay, I'll get this done later. I'll have plenty of time later. They don't realize that a task may take 2 or 3 times as long as it should. Okay. Let's see. So when you're raising kids with ADHD, it is really difficult to avoid helicopter parenting. This is a Zitz cartoon. If you're familiar with that, it's a classic cartoon. The mom is a classic example of helicopter parenting. How's that big English project coming along, Jeremy? Fine. When's it due? Thursday. What day is this? This Thursday? How far along are you? Monday. In that case, I'm 2 days away from starting it. And procrastination is like kryptonite to moms. This is a classic example where the mom is so concerned about this and the kid is not concerned. And when you overfunction like that, it actually makes it more likely that your child is not going to think about it, because they figure maybe unconsciously, oh, mom will think about that. She'll remind me. She's not going to let me be late on that. Okay. Let's move on. Executive functions impaired in ADHD. This is just a good example, just a good graphic here to tell you about the different types of executive functioning. Activation, organizing, prioritizing, getting yourself starting to work, staying focused on a task. Number 2, regulating your alertness, sustained effort, processing speed, that's keeping yourself going throughout the task. Managing frustration and modulating your emotions. If you get frustrated too easily, which is common in people with ADHD, it's going to be very difficult to get a task done. Working memory, we already talked about. Action is monitoring and self-regulating action. Again, that sort of ability to observe yourself and be aware of the process is very difficult in people with ADHD. The brain CEO or office manager. This is going to give you an example of all the different things that might be going on in your child's brain, in which makes it very difficult to focus on any one of those because your mind gets distracted so easily. All right. So let me talk a little bit about the effect of ADHD symptoms on behavior management. Okay. The reason it's important for you to understand this is because if you recognize the why, it should help you not get so frustrated or blaming your child for having these things. These are things that are very common and typical. Okay. So inattention leads to forgetting a task, getting distracted, not finishing the task. They may not even realize that they didn't finish the task. They may have thought they finished cleaning the bathroom, and you go in and you say 3 things that didn't get done. They may have done 2 or 3 things and says, oh yeah, that looks good. That looks much better. And they don't notice. It's the same thing as walking past an overflowing trash can. Kids with ADHD, they don't even notice that it's there. And adults are similar sometimes. And so, and if things are out of sight, it means that they're out of mind. One of the reasons that people with ADHD don't like throwing things away is because, or putting things away, I'm sorry, is that they're not going to remember where they put them. And so as long as they're out, it may look like a whole mess, but at least they can see it. Which is why one of the things that can help kids with ADHD is to label things. If you have a bin that's labeled what goes in it, if you have a hamper where there's dirty clothes, that's where it goes. Just a quick suggestion here. If you were to put a little basketball hoop on top of a hamper for dirty clothes and for trash, more likely than not, you're going to get more things going into those containers, because what you've done is you've made a task more interesting and challenging that otherwise would be very boring. And that's something to keep in mind when you're trying to figure out how can you increase your child's motivation to get a task done. Let's talk about hyperactivity. Sitting still for long periods of time is like torture. So when you have a kid for 6 hours having to sit still in class, and then they come home and they're supposed to sit still again to do their homework, by that time, they're really maxed out. Kids with ADHD need a lot more activity. They're holding it in as best as they can during the school day. Okay. One thing to keep in mind, a lot of times parents will, if I see it in my office too, it's like, well, sit still, stop fidgeting. Well, telling a kid with ADHD to stop fidgeting is like telling them to stop breathing. They can do it temporarily for short periods of time, but they can't sustain it. So it's one of the reasons in my office I have a ton of fidgets. They're on my shelves. I have a whole box of them. And if I see a child struggling to stay focused and getting fidgety, I offer the fidgets, and that helps quite a bit. So I see it, I see the problem, I see what's going on, and I help them compensate, give them something that will help them control their behavior better. It gives them something fun to focus on. And there's all sorts of different kinds of fidgets one can get. Sometimes the hyperactivity can be mental. It's like having just so many thoughts and feelings going through your head that you just can't slow them down. That also causes problems at bedtime. So if your mind is going, it's very hard to just settle down and go to sleep. This is recess. One of the worst things you can do for a kid with ADHD is punish them by not giving them recess. They need that period of time. What some teachers do wisely, in my opinion, is that kid might lose maybe 1 or 2 minutes, the first couple of minutes of recess or free time. That can seem like an eternity to somebody, but it does emphasize the point that there is a consequence, but you're not being counterproductive by keeping them in when they really need to get that extra energy out. Impulsivity. Kids with ADHD, again, they react quickly. They don't think ahead. Their mouth opens up and they say things that they shouldn't to you. You may see it as disrespectful intentionally. It often isn't. So one of the things you have to do is help them, again, step back, or if they overdo it, they react impulsively, to talk them through it and give them a chance to respond differently. But keep in mind, again, impulsivity in your thoughts and your behaviors, your actions, it's all part of ADHD. Jumping to conclusions. I think that I'm never going to be able to get my homework done. It's too hard. That's an impulsive thought that can lead them to avoid it more. Interrupting. One of the reasons that kids with ADHD interrupt so much is that if they don't interrupt you, they're going to forget what they had to say, which is very frustrating. So missing details, misjudging time, etc. Blind leading the blind. Since ADHD is a neurobiological disorder that has genetic underpinnings, if a child has ADHD, chances are one of the parents, sometimes both, have ADHD as well. So when I'm working with somebody and I'm trying to get them to use a behavioral system, it's really hard to be consistent with all these different techniques. And I say this just to be easy on yourself. Don't get too down on yourself. Recognize that you're going to struggle as well, being consistent. But one of the things I will say about that is that you need to be forgiving of yourself if you are forgetting the details and not being consistent, but you also need to forgive your children. So when they mess up because they were impulsive or they couldn't follow through, use your own understanding of yourself to help them feel not so bad, because you don't want them to, you don't want to shame kids for having these disorders, but you do want to help compensate for them. One of the things that parents sometimes will tell me is that, you know, my kid blames ADHD for everything and they use it as an excuse. And I say, it's not an excuse. It's a rationale. It's a reason why something happened or didn't go well. you're still responsible for figuring out how to fix it. And if you handled something poorly, if you said something mean, you still have to apologize, okay? You can't just say, well, I have ADHD, I can't do my homework. No, doing your homework is going to be harder because of ADHD, but you still have to do it. Let's figure out a way to help you do this successfully. So why ADHD kids have meltdowns? The impulsivity is, and I've said this a number of times, and you'll see during the talk, I am repeating myself some. I think it's important because I think you sometimes need to hear things a couple of different times in different contexts for it to fully sink in. So kids with ADHD have trouble sorting through their thoughts and feelings. Okay, they get overwhelmed by them, leading to emotional dysregulation. Again, that's not a key symptom of ADHD based on our diagnostic criteria, but it is absolutely an important part of ADHD. Again, acting impulsively on thoughts and feelings without processing. Think about the fights that go on between your siblings. Thinking, taking something without permission, sneaking food, yelling, teasing your siblings, whatever it might be. Again, without thinking about it. Dr. Ross Greene is the author of a book called The Explosive Child, a new approach for understanding and parenting easily frustrated, chronically inflexible children. And he created a method called collaborative and proactive solutions. And one of the things that he emphasizes here is that kids do well if they can, okay? If they can't do well in a certain situation, it's not always intentional. They have lagging skills. Their ability to control their impulses is lagging. Their ability to pay close attention and follow through on a task is lagging. It's behind. And so when you realize that, you have to remember that your child may be 8 years old, but they may be operating on a 6-year-old level when it comes to task completion, staying focused, etc. So the task then becomes for you as parents is how do we help them learn those skills? I'll give you just a brief example. Something just happened this week with one of my patients. The boy was waiting in the waiting room while I was talking to the parents, and he goes charging right into the door. And he, instead of saying, hey, you interrupted us, you should knock. I just said, I didn't hear you knock. Try that again. And he goes back. I had him go out back in the hallway, close the door, and he knocks. I says, oh, who's there? Obviously, I knew. Oh, come on in. And he comes in. Thanks so much for knocking. So you take something that's an impulsive behavior and you give them a second chance, a chance to redo it. And all of a sudden, this is an area of success for the child. Imagine and do this regularly. And imagine how much better your child is going to feel if they get a chance to redo and they're learning those skills. And the trick with that as well is that you have to, every time they do something the right way, control their impulses, do something without being asked, always mention it. Don't have the attitude of, well, he should do that anyway. I shouldn't have to praise him for it. Kids with ADHD need that more. Most kids need that, and I think it's generally helpful. You don't want to overdo it, but it is important, okay? I said here, it's not always intentional. If things are really have taken a negative approach in your family, which usually is the case when they come to see me, it may become intentional. Kids may not have intentionally wanted to be disobedient, but if they feel you're overly harsh and overly critical, then they may fight back. And so then they're punishing you for how you're treating them, which obviously causes problems for everybody. So use of collaborative problem solving, what this basically means is if there's a problem, saying getting up in the morning, what time homework is done, bedtime routine, etc., that you sit down with your child and you try to collaborate. You try to come up with a solution that everybody can agree on. And what that does is increase your child's motivation to solve a problem. And when they're involved, they're less likely to have meltdowns because they have some influence, as opposed to they have zero influence at all. And they just have to listen. Parents also have trouble responding calmly. So think fire extinguisher. If your child is yelling at you and you respond by yelling back and screaming and threatening and all that kind of stuff, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire. You're just exploding it. That doesn't help anybody. Okay, so one of the things you want to do is think fire extinguisher. How can I extinguish this fire so that my child can calm down? Because nobody can think clearly when they're angry. Once you calm down, then there's a possibility of being able to interact, okay? A redo can help, which I just gave you the example of. Again, remembering kids are still learning to manage their emotions. And what I tell parents is, I have higher expectations for you as adults to manage your emotions than I do for your child because he or she is still learning. So if you're having trouble, you can understand why your child has trouble. All right. So let's talk about the effects of ADHD on family and school functioning. Obviously, a number of different things can occur. It is more stressful for everybody in the family, keeping track of not only what you need to do and your other kids, but also reminding them, getting them to wake up, et cetera, remember their homework. There tends to be more conflict with siblings, parents, and teachers. There's often less free time for other activities because it's taking so much time getting your child to do his or her homework, for example. Parents questioning their parenting skills, adding to your stress. One of the things I often say to parents is that parenting a kid with ADHD or other mental health disorders, it requires a specialized set of skills. So don't blame yourself if you're not quite sure how to deal with this. There are techniques that we have that have been proven effective. So that's what therapy is all about. That's what self-help is all about. There's a lot of self-help books out there for parenting. I don't necessarily agree with everything that they say, but there are some good ideas, and it's a matter of finding what works for you and your family. Resentment on the part of siblings and spouses for the same reasons. The extra attention. Sometimes kids will feel like there's a double set of standards. One set of standards for child with ADHD and another set of standards for the other kids, which is not fair. And it's important to validate that frustration. The lower self-esteem for your child with ADHD can lead, especially as they get into the teenage years, to depression, fear of failure. Also puts them at greater risk for substance abuse. If your child is hyperactive and finds that drinking or marijuana slows them down and calms them down, they're more likely to self-medicate, which obviously causes problems. Lack of consistency with grades and performance is the norm. This is important that you're going to have to get used to. Okay, think of whack-a-mole. If you remember, amusement parks. You get a handle of this class, and then something else pops up. It's really hard to keep all of that going at the same time. So try not to get too frustrated. Again, the lack of consistency is the norm. You want to try to, it doesn't mean you just give up on it, but you have to understand that this is very typical. All right. Using behavioral strategies successfully. So again, remembering that ADHD affects more than school. It affects home, friendships, etc. Successful treatment is critical because it predicts success in adulthood. What we know is that most kids don't outgrow ADHD completely. We think one estimate is maybe about a third may outgrow it. A third may become less hyperactive, impulsive, but still has trouble with inattention. And maybe about a third have the continuing symptoms all the way through adulthood and later years. Again, parents need to learn new strategies. Starting earlier is better, but later is better than never. So don't feel like it's too late. You start where you can. It's really important to follow through on treatment. Some people do really well and only need treatment as needed, but if you give up on treatment and then just wait for things to fall apart again, that can make it harder. Again, be sure to include your child in the process, especially as they get older. All right. One of the things we know is that how a child with ADHD will do in adulthood is best predicted by three things. So one is whether or not his or her parents use effective parenting skills. Two, how he or she gets along with other children. And three, his or her success in school. Okay. So, and again, we have treatments for all of those things. And when it comes to the peers, if you don't know how to navigate the social world and interact with coworkers and bosses and managers, you're going to have trouble. So again, that's why it's so important to help kids learn better social skills. The kids who have good social skills, and many kids with ADHD do, especially if they don't have other complicating problems, they tend to do better. So before you start on a behavioral program, there's some things that you want to think about first. You need some data. You want to know when these things happen. When is the problem happening? Is it in the morning getting up for school? Is it after school with homework? Is it bedtime routine? Is it dinner routine? Is it when they're left unsupervised? So once you find out when, where, and then think about why it's happening at that point. For example, if you have somebody that's getting up in the morning and they have a hard time, staying focused, maybe some kids take a longer time to wake up. So you're going to have more trouble with that routine. Bedtime, if they're very antsy and fidgety and they can't settle down, that could be the reason why they're having trouble, in which case you might decide to have some physical activity, even if it's just running around the house or whatever, before they go to bed so that they can settle down more easily. You want to set some goals, okay? Try to make them as clearly defined and specific as possible. Behave better is not a specific goal. Putting away your clothes before you go to bed, that's a specific. Brushing your teeth, that's a specific goal. Remembering to empty the trash or put out the recycling if that happens to be one of their chores, that would be a goal. Not being aggressive, not hitting your siblings could be a specific goal. Using your words instead of your actions. Breaking it into time periods just helps you understand kind of, these are the 4 areas that parents often complain about. Consistency is important, but not always possible. So again, do the best you can. It's important to be patient. Take trial and error. One thing, if you're coming up with a behavioral system, and we'll talk more about this shortly, is try something out for a week or 2. And then at the end of that period of time, get together with your child, family, and say, okay, how did this work? What parts of this work well? If there's parts that didn't work, why do we think it didn't work? And what can we do differently? So a very common negotiation that I think can work well with kids is when they do their homework. Some kids want to do it right after school. Most don't, let's be honest here. But many times they want to do it later. And it really doesn't matter exactly when, as long as it gets done. And so if your child wants to go out and play first for an hour or 2 and then do it after dinner, you say, well, let's try it for a week. If you can come back after dinner and get it done, then we can still do it your way. If that doesn't work, that means, okay, you're running out of steam to do it then. So you're going to need to do some of it before you go out to play. Or maybe you decide, okay, you do half of your homework, you do 20 minutes of homework, then you get to go out and play, and then you finish it later. Any of those things might be, would be perfectly acceptable to you as long as it gets done, keeping in mind the other tasks. And also, if your child's on medication, that can be a factor as well. The focus may not be there by after mealtime, so you have to take that into account. All right, so let me talk about some general principles in managing ADHD. These, and let me just mention also, these are strategies that would work for any kid. It's just especially important when you have kids with ADHD. So make sure your child understands the rules and expectations. Post them and ask what they are. Try not to repeat, because the more you repeat, the more they tune you out. Remember, so you can say, hey, what's the rule about going to the store? Okay, we have to stay with you. What happens if you behave appropriately in the store and you don't run off and you follow directions? That would be a goal. Then maybe they get some game time when they get home. And what happens if you don't? Then I don't get the game time. Have them repeat it, because when they're repeating it to themselves, they're more likely to process it, because it gives, not only are they saying it, but they're hearing themselves say it. Okay. Posting the rules can be very useful. Just put it what the rules are. Put it in your child's bedroom, wherever it needs to be. Establish routines and try to stick with them. Again, kids with ADHD are terribly bored by routines, but they need them desperately. Okay. So one of the advantages of routine is that it helps you not have to think so much. It makes things a little bit more automatic. Okay. Think of leaving home. How many of you have occasionally said, hey, did I close the door? Did I lock the house? I can't quite remember. Chances are when you go back, you did it, but you didn't think about it because it's just a routine that you may have. So if kids are in the matter of routine, for example, the first thing they get home when from school is they hang their backpack up or put their backpack in their room or whatever it might be. That helps kids remember them. Creating checklists, mark them off as they're completed. Some kids really like that. Parents will give them a short checklist. These are things I need you to do today. Carry the card, maybe on an index card. They carry it around with them. They click it or they check it off, and then they come back to the parents later on when those things are done. Using checklists and to-do lists are very helpful. Most people need them at some point in their lives. If you get kids to sort of do it themselves, it's even better, again, when the kids are doing the writing. And then you mark them off as they're completed, because that can be very, that can be rewarding for somebody, or just satisfying to just mark those things off. Giving clear and short, understandable directions. Remember low working memory, remember short attention span. So you want to be as brief as possible. A lot of times parents go on and on and on about explaining something. They lose you after about 5 or 6 words. So you want to try to, again, keep it short. One of the things we know is for kids, for example, for teenagers, some teenagers do really well if parents text them the reminder. and then they respond that way. So that's always something. Give clear and short, understandable directions. Let me give you another example. Telling somebody, yelling at somebody to stop walking or stop running is more of a negative thing, and tell somebody and is more critical. If instead you say, walk, please, that actually, because it's phrased in a positive way, you may get better compliance by saying walk, please. And it sounds better. It feels more respectful. Hey, walk, please. Thank you very much, as opposed to stop running. Let's see. Setting clocks and timers when possible. Mention problems with time management. So having a clock or a timer can be very useful. Having them around the house can be useful. I have a clock that's right here in front of me that I took from the other room. So I'm keeping track of how much time I'm spending so that I stay on track and don't go over time. There are timers you can actually get for kids with ADHD that are like they're visual, and you can, there's like a green period where you're fine, and then a yellow period where you're running low on time, and then a red period with numbers as well. For some kids, having it that visible in front of them helps. It helps them notice it because it's colorful, and it helps them keep track, and it compensates for the lack of time awareness. Providing actually, let me back up a little bit. Timers are also good. If there's something that you're wanting your child to do and you set a timer for it, that actually can be more motivating because you can actually make it a contest. For example, in my office, I have these 3-minute sand timers. And when it's time to clean up, kids have to turn the sand timer over. And if they clean up in that time period, they can get a sticker, for example. And if they choose not to clean up on that time period, then they don't get the sticker because then I have to do it. And I'm always offering to help. And so once you have that, once you make it sort of a competition, kids have more fun, and we might be doing it together. Come on, we can do it. We can do it. Let's do this and that. And you're compensating for the lack of dopamine by turning something into a competition. So think about that as well. Providing frequent feedback. Again, don't take good behavior for granted. Try to notice it as much as possible. Look for the positives. Humans are, the way we're wired is that we are more likely to notice something that's not right than something that is right. It gets our attention. So you have to flip that around as parents to be able to always look for the positives. Kids with ADHD get enough negativity, so you don't need to add to that. So look for every time they're doing something well, every time they're controlling themselves. You know, even something like, hey, I saw you get really mad at your sister there, but I saw you back away. Awesome, way to go, high five. That's not an easy thing to do, is it? You probably felt like kidding her, didn't you? That way you're acknowledging and reinforcing self-control. So don't expect perfection. You want to start with what went right. And a good example of this, what I mean is that if you are reviewing your child's homework, report card. Okay, so hey, tell me about your report card. What do you think about this? You know, what are you most proud of? What went well? Well, I got an A in this subject. Oh, how did you do that? Okay, so you really worked hard and it was more fun. You enjoyed the subject. So that does make it do well. So are there any grades that you're a little disappointed in maybe? Yeah, I got a C in this class. Oh, okay. So what happened there? Okay, maybe you forgot a couple assignments. So what could you do differently? It's a very different approach than just focusing on, hey, you know, yeah, you got a few good grades, but you failed this class or you got some D's, so you're grounded now. That's not very motivating. So if you're processing with them as a consultant parent, you're more likely to get your child to then be the one acknowledging some disappointment. It's better to come from your child than from you. Because generally that can increase their motivation, especially if they know, yeah, you feel for them. You know that things didn't go so well, but what can we do differently? This also helps kids focus on the positive as well. So let me back up here. Use when, then, or as soon as statements. So this, again, this is a good strategy for all kids, especially important for kids with ADHD. So can I go out and play, Mom? No, you can't go out and play. Get your homework done first and your chores. Once that happens, yeah, you can go out if you have time. I mean, hear the tone, as opposed to, hey, Mom, can I go out and play? Absolutely. Absolutely, you can go out and play. As soon as your homework gets done and your stuff gets put away, absolutely, you can go. The advantage of that is you're basically saying yes when you mean no. So it softens the blow. And that enthusiasm in your voice is actually going to be more motivating to your child. Okay, so set up an incentive. We're just talking about that. Set up an incentive system. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second as well. But there is a sample at our website under the parenting page, behavioral chart. Incentive systems work very well for a lot of kids. And again, what I'll say just about this right now is that incentives help compensate for things that aren't as rewarding. You go to work, you get paid. It makes it easier to go to work knowing you're going to get paid. If you can get your child's teacher to set up a similar incentive system that works well, sometimes teachers have like a class dojo system where they do like a points where the parents can access that as well. But if you have a child who's struggling at school, sometimes you can have maybe even a short little printout from the teacher about how well they did, whether they use good manners, whether they would use good listening, whether they completed classwork, and then you can piggyback on that at home to provide some rewards for that as well. Some teachers have like a prize box or whatever that they use for kids also. Again, the idea is to make these things more rewarding, things that are difficult. You want to plan ahead for problems and how to address. That's really important as well. Because if you plan ahead knowing that this is a problem area, you're much more likely to handle it well. If you know a car ride is going to be a problem, a lot of parents will allow kids to use their devices in the car because it helps. If you're going to take your child in an outing that you know is going to be boring for them, to say, hey, listen, I know we're going to be out for a while and you're probably going to get bored. What are some things that maybe you could take with you? So if you have a child, maybe pack a backpack with certain things that are in there that they can do that would be fun for them. That helps. That is planning ahead. So you're less likely to have a problem. If you know that going to the store is always difficult because your kids are screaming and yelling they want to buy everything that they see, you need to address that first. So, and it may be that the privilege of going with you is something that they earn. It may also be that money that they earn through an incentive system, they get to spend at a store. That could be a reward as well. All right. Let's see. Actually, there's one other point that I want to make. I think I missed. Be sure incentives and expectations are age appropriate. You can start very early with expectations. A 2-year-old can help clean up toys if you do it with them. If you get them into the habit of doing things like that and praise them along the way, they're much more likely to want to help later on. Kids do like being helpful. I think we as adults sometimes ruin it for them based on how we do it. And if you can involve them in an activity, even better. For example, if a 3 or 4-year-old could actually help, maybe even like crack eggs into a batter, sort of helping bake a cake, or they could maybe sprinkle confectioner sugar. Yeah, it might make a mess a little bit. That's true. But if their expectation is that they are helping out and they get praise for that and they get a good time with you, they're more likely to want to do that as they get older. So if you're expecting too much of a child, you're not going to expect a 3-year-old to not have a tantrum, for example. You can't expect a 4-year-old to go in their room and clean their room on their own. No, they need more supervision at that point. So if you expect something and they can't do it, then again, if it's a lagging skill, you have to figure out, okay, so what is my child able to do? You may need to break it down that way. All right, so let me talk about incentives and rewards. So it is not bribery. I hear people all the time tell me, oh, I had to bribe him to behave. No. Bribery is illegal. Bribery is paying your child off so that they won't tell that you got drunk or spent all your money gambling or did something that you're not supposed to do. That's bribery. Incentives, think of incentives as paychecks. It makes it easy. It makes it more rewarding for people to do things that are not pleasant. Okay, so bribes are given to politicians to keep somebody from squealing. Okay, I'll give you my candy if you won't tell mom I broke her favorite vase. That's a bribe. So now, for incentives to work, they must be valued by your child, something that's important, whether it's game time, whether it's money, whether it's time playing a game with you, whether it's going to grab an ice cream at the store, whatever it might be. it should be able to be given freely in small amounts. So child is, and the more difficulty they have with focus, the more frequent the incentives need to be. And ideally, you want to get to the point. You want to get to the point of just relying more on praise. So so that way praise will be sufficient. And to use an example, I mean, puppies and kids share some similarities. One of the things we do when we're training dogs is you give them little rewards, like a little morsel, like every time they do something the way you want them to do. And what you do is you gradually wean them off of that. So then praising them for the good behavior is sufficient because they now associate the praise with the physical reward that they got. So relevant to the desired behavior. Incentives work best if they're relevant to the desired behavior. And what that means is, for example, a child who succeeds in keeping his or her room clean can earn a new toy, right? A desired item of clothing or whatnot. For example, if a child is not able to keep their room clean and there's too much stuff, then you would say, well, okay, no, it sounds like you're having enough trouble keeping your room clean as it is. So buying more stuff is just going to make the problem worse. It's just going to make more work for you. So no, you don't have my permission to buy things. But if you want to work on keeping your room cleaner or giving away some of the stuff you're not using, yeah, then we can think about getting some new clothes for you or a new toy. So that way it's something that they want, okay? It's not something you've already taken away. So think about this. If you're at work and you miss a deadline and your boss tells you, open your wallet, give me the however much money, let's say it's $200 that you're in this week. Yeah, I'm going to take it back. You really screwed up. I'm really disappointed in you. And then you walk away and say, hey, if you can get this done by X time, yeah, I'll give you your money back. And say you do it and then you get the money back. Are you going to have a really good feeling about that? Or are you going to have some resentment? Is your anxiety going to go up? It's not going to be terribly motivating. So if they've already earned something, and then you keep taking it away, that can be very demoralizing, if you will. So, but one of the things to think about is if you can start from zero every day, that's usually better. So that way, for example, if your child has no points that day, but depending on how well they did and how many points they earned that day, they can trade them in for privileges later in the day, okay? If they don't do what they're supposed to do, they're not behind, they just didn't earn anything that day. So the harder they work, the more reward they get. You're not just taking it away. So think about that as much. But now losing screen time is a different matter. If screen time is causing problems with other things, then what you may have to do with screens, and actually it's the same thing as I said here, I believe that screens should generally be earned, not to be given freely. One of the things we do know, I mentioned earlier that ADHD is a biological condition, a genetic condition. That's true. But research is showing us that kids who spend too much time on screens, especially when they're young, don't learn how to pay attention to things that are less interesting and less rewarding. Okay, so video games, for example, are designed to be addictive. They are created in ways that keep you engaged. Cell phones are the same way. Facebook, anything that you're talking about, all the notifications you get, these are all designed to engage you and make you want to keep checking or doing these things. And so because of that, what happens is that think of the difference between sitting down with some Legos and spending an hour putting something together and all the steps that it takes to do that successfully. Compare that activity to the constant stimulation of a video game. If all you do is the video game, you're not going to learn how to focus on these things because it's going to be too difficult because it's not rewarding. So there are some people who say that they don't even want to treat people for ADHD unless they are off all screens for a number of months to help your brain reset. So to keep that in mind as well. I know that's a little bit of a tangent I went on, but in general, you don't want to give a reward and then take it away. When you do that too many times, it loses its effectiveness. Rewards or incentives may need to be changed frequently to keep it interesting. One example of that, if you remember, actually, this is a little bit different, but if anybody remembers the blue light specials at Kmart, that what happened is you're in the store and all of a sudden there's a blue light special and a certain item is now discounted. That increases people's incentive to buy it. It makes it more rewarding just like that, okay? So one of the things you can do is if you are changing an incentive, for example, if they can earn an ice cream this time and that's not working so much, and they can earn, okay, now they can earn maybe, a trip out to breakfast, which might be a different thing. Or instead of earning a money reward, maybe they earn action figures, or maybe they earn another Lego set. What you're doing is you're keeping it more interesting. What you can do also for things that your child is having particular trouble with, going back to the blue light special, is you can say, okay, well, this week or today is blue light special day on cleaning your room and getting all of your clothes and toys put away. And if you do that, you're going to get double points or double money for that. And if you say it in a way that's kind of exciting, you can get they get more excited about it. And so that way, it compensates. And if that works, that tells you, okay, my current rewards aren't rewarding enough. So what do I need to do? All right. Here's some additional points to consider in terms of coming up with an incentive system. Make it fun as much as possible. Again, that compensates for the lack of interest that they have in boring tasks. Putting music on when you're cleaning, if the whole family is doing that, and on the weekends, sometimes families do that. That makes it more fun as well. Putting timers, who cleans their room up the fastest, whatever it might be. Offering to help is always a good thing, but always ask first. Sometimes I think parents are a little too quick to just jump in and help them with something. You want to ask them, because kids are going to value what they earn more, I think, if they're the ones that earned it. So even if it's something like cleaning up, to say, hey, do you need some help with that, or do you think you can handle it on your own? And a lot of times kids will say, I think I can handle it on my own. And then they feel better about it. So always, you can offer to help, especially for a task that is going to be difficult, but ask first. I think that's just actually being respectful to see if they need help. Extra points for doing things without reminders. One of the goals of an incentive system at home is that you want them to learn to be more self-sufficient. So you don't want them to just rely on the rewards. And so the idea behind this is you want them to be thinking about what they're wanting to earn and what they're wanting to do. And so if they're thinking about it and they do something before you've had to remind them, and you give them extra points, then the motivation is, then what that does for the child is, okay, how am I going to get myself to remember to do it without a reminder? And then when that happens, you can also praise them for that. Why, I didn't even have to tell you to do that. So I have kids in my office who, may have ADHD, but when I tell them, hey, the rule in the office is just put things away when you're done with them. And some kids are really good at that, and they do it automatically. And so I say, wow, that is awesome. And I'll praise them in front of their parents. I'm really impressed that every time you come in here, you put everything away without a reminder. And what's the good thing about that? Well, and again, it could be a sticker, not in this case, or it could just be, then was it kind of nice that I didn't have to remind you or nag you about it? You're learning how to be more independent. Way to go. And being able to do that also translates into more independence during the teenage years, because as teenagers, kids they have to keep track of things. You're not always going to be there to remind them of everything that they do. Give choices when possible in terms of time and order. Think of the example I gave you earlier with regard to homework. That with homework, it doesn't really, or cleaning the room or whatever it might be, if you give them some choices in terms of when or how, they're more likely to comply because they've had a voice. Think of how you would feel if every time at work there was a staff meeting and there was no input allowed and you just had to do whatever you were told to do. Your motivation to do it isn't going to be so high. If anything, you might be more passive aggressive and resist doing what you're being told to do. Don't give in when your child is whining or having a tantrum. So here's the problem with that, is that if your child whines or has a tantrum about something and you give in, what you've done is you've rewarded the tantrum. Okay, you've given them that they learn that having a tantrum gets them what they want. Okay, now there are some kids, especially kids with mood disorders like bipolar disorder, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. These are kids that can have meltdowns that last 15, 30, 45 minutes, and it just affects the entire family. So if you have somebody who can't control it, and again, think lagging skills, sometimes what you may have to do is give them a partial reward for calming down. It's like, okay, you've lost, you started screaming and yelling and hitting mommy. So now you've lost the privilege of X. However, if you're willing to apologize and maybe do an extra chore for me to kind of show that you're sorry, we can still do this. We can't have that, but you can get like a smaller reward. And then what you're doing is you're rewarding calming down. Okay. Don't repeat commands endlessly. They'll tune you out. Again, keep it short. Remember that short-term attention. That's why shorter commands are more likely to listen. Use extinction, withdrawing attention from negative behavior. Okay. So with this is if you give attention to negative behavior, you're going to see more negative behavior. If your child is fighting with his or her sibling all the time and you start yelling at the aggressor here and punishing them, that is still giving attention. Okay. So extinguish for small little things that really don't warrant, intervention. Sometimes you just want to ignore some of the little stuff. So if your child doesn't get your attention when behaving badly, but they do get your attention when they're behaving well, you're more likely to see that negative behavior go extinct because it's not being rewarded. I'll give you an example that I use in my siblings talk that I think works really well. Usually if you have two kids arguing or fighting and it's getting out of hand, some parents yell at both kids and, focus on that. But if you have especially a pattern where you have, say, an older child kind of making fun of a younger child, and it's a constant thing. And how many times have I told you to be nicer to your brother? That's not really going to help. So, and again, if the older one knows they're going to get your attention, and that becomes part of the problem, one of the things you can do is give attention to the victim. So think about this. Say they're arguing and you see the older one, teasing the younger one. Instead, you say nothing to the older one, who's the aggressor, and you go to the younger one and say, "Hey, Tommy, what's going on? It really hurts your feelings when your brother calls you that name. Yeah, why do you think he does that?" Some kids name call because they don't feel really good about themselves and they're just looking for some excitement. But I can understand how upset you are with that. And then say you pick them up and say, "Hey, why don't you come in the other room with me? Let's go have a little snack." And maybe that'll help you feel a little bit better. And then you just walk away. So that's going to be different for most kids. And if they realize, wait a minute, my brother got more attention when I was being mean to him and I got none. And it's not like they necessarily think about that, consciously, but you may find that eventually that negative behavior fades because it's not getting any attention from you. Now, the flip side of that is that you need to pay attention when that aggressive child is being appropriate. So that way they're getting it. It's not just withdrawing the attention for negative behavior, it's giving more attention for the positive behavior. Again, to be able to say, "Hey, I'm really proud of you. I saw you getting upset with your brother and I could see you started to say something, but you caught yourself and you stopped. Way to go. I'm really proud of you. I really appreciate when you're being nice to your brother." And that way they're getting attention for good behavior and you're not taking it for granted. All right. So when you're coming up with behavioral systems, you want to involve all the caregivers as much as possible. Mom, dad, if parents are divorced, you have step parents coming in, that's often helpful. I had a session recently where mom and the dad and their respective partners, new partners, were all involved and they're all working together to help this kid. And, I just thought, hey, this is awesome. I'm really impressed that you guys are able to do this, because when everybody can be together, a system's going to be much more effective than if, mom's the one that's enforcing it. And then dad comes home and he gives the kids a bunch of privileges, whether or not they rewarded it, or doesn't bother to check the chore list to see that things are done. Expecting your child to test limits, it's normal and healthy. Okay. I say that to you because I don't want you to get overly upset about it. Testing limits, kids need to know where their limits are. And once they realize that this is the limit and this is the reaction that they're going to get, then they can back down. But if they never know where the limits are, they're just going to keep pushing because they know that some of the time they may get their way. You need to make sure your child needs the rewards. So if your child already has everything they could possibly want, rewards on top of that may not be very effective. So you don't want to over provide for kids. Okay. If they don't need the rewards, they're not going to be motivated. If you're a millionaire, you're not going to be very motivated to go to work at Starbucks the next morning. You can get up early and earn $15 an hour. you don't really need to do that unless you, for some reason, really like working at Starbucks and you really like their, pumpkin spice lattes. You want to react calmly to failures. Shaming is not a motivator. Kids are often disappointed in themselves when they don't do well. So, so it can be very helpful just to say, hey, how did you feel? I saw this, low test grade. Yeah, that can happen. I can understand why you'd be upset about that. So how do you think that happened and what can we do? Again, you're being calm to failures. What you want to do is you want to save the fireworks for the good behavior. When something good happens and they did really well on a test, that's where you want to scream and yell and jump up and down. Praising appropriate behavior frequently, again, not taking for granted. We've talked about that a number of times here. Ignore mildly inappropriate behavior or redirect. Those are also good things. Not everything needs to have some sort of consequence. So let me talk a little bit about troubleshooting when problems arise in an incentive system. Okay. So, and this is all in the handout on our website on behavioral charts. So when problems arise, when you find that an incentive system either is no longer working or doesn't work in the first place, these are some things you need to ask yourself. If rewards aren't meaningful or lost their effectiveness, that can make a system less effective. If the rewards are not given when promised, and that's on you as parents, that's extinction. If you do not reward consistently, they're going to lose their motivation to do it. If you're not consistent enough, or if you undermine the system by feeling sorry for your kids when they don't do something and you give them the reward anyway, that doesn't really teach them. Well, it teaches them something, but not what you're wanting to teach them. If there's too much focus on the negative, which can result in anger and resentment, passive aggressive behavior, where you just say you're going to do something and you don't do it because that's your way of protesting. That's why it's important to be careful about like taking away points. When I was first becoming a psychologist, I would come up with these reward systems that I thought were great. And then the parents would come in and how'd it go? And they'd say, oh, awful. He's already 60 points in the hole. Okay, so where's the incentive that he's going to have to try to come through with that? It's not there. So it's better to start from zero. Again, you don't want to focus too much on the negative. If kids aren't capable of engaging consistently, that's one of the things you got to be careful of with incentive systems. If you're expecting an ADHD child to stay focused long-term with rewarding them, for example, a reward at the end of the week, think of short-term attention span. Most kids are not able to do that. If they could, they probably wouldn't have ADHD in the first place. So you need to, if that's expecting too much, or if your child is so hyperactive, they can't sit still long enough to do something, then you're expecting too much. And so you're going to have to cut back a little bit, or wait until you have a child treated with medication, for example, and we'll talk about meds in a minute. Then if they're more capable of following through, then they're going to feel better and it's going to work better. Kids not capable of engaging consistently can also occur if you are expecting, really good behavior and focusing on homework at the end of a school day when they've just maxed out. For a lot of kids, sometimes kids behave at school and they misbehave at home, and people will think, oh, the parents must not be doing something right. It may be, and is often the case with kids with ADHD. They put all the energy they can possibly muster into keeping it together at school. They're just spent by the time they get home. And if that's the case, you're going to probably have to lower your expectations a little bit as well. Overfocus on consequences and punishment. One of the things to keep in mind is that punishment is the least effective form of discipline. And that is something that is important to remember. Because it again, punishing people and help usually creates anger. So you really want to focus on incentives and rewards for good behavior as much as possible. I'm not saying there's never a punishment is appropriate, but when you have a punishment, again, it should be related to what they did wrong. Somebody who is, sneaking food all the time, they may lose the privilege of having snacks. Maybe just you only have fruit, which is not a bad thing. If you have somebody who is playing games to the point they're not doing their work, then you may need to restrict the game use for a while because this is something that's interfering with their ability to be successful. As opposed to taking their game system because they talk back to you. There's really no connection between those two things. And it's going to be harder for kids to learn from that. All right. So let me talk a little bit about ADHD medications. right? So ADHD medications are an important part of an overall treatment strategy. They don't fix everything. Maybe about 50% improve on average, maybe up to 70%. They don't work for everything. So they don't fix everything, because even if your child is more focused, it doesn't mean they're all of a sudden going to be able to handle all the demands of school. So keep that in mind. It's not a cure. It just helps compensate. One of the things that medicines do is they tend to increase the level of dopamine in the system, like I said earlier, or they stimulate the control centers of the brain so that you have better control. Okay. There are stimulants and non-stimulants. You've got Ritalin and Adderall, Focalin. Those are and some of their derivatives. Those are examples of stimulants. Again, they stimulate the control centers of the brain. Non-stimulants would include things like guanfacine or clonidine. They're actually blood pressure medicines originally, but they have a calming effect and can help focus as well. They don't have some of the side effects of the stimulants, such as losing your appetite and sleep disturbance for some kids. There's also Strattera, which is a non-stimulant, and that is something that builds up in your system over like a 4 to 6 week period of time. And I don't think it's as effective as the stimulants, but they're good for people who, for whatever reasons, can't tolerate stimulants or shouldn't be on stimulants. There's also a new one called Quelby. There's a lot of different medicines now that we have. And the difference between the medicines isn't just the mechanism of action, but also has to do with the duration and how it's distributed. For example, some medicines can last 12 to 16 hours now, which is pretty awesome. Others are short acting, where they may last 2 to 4 hours. And so often it's to find the right combination or the right dosages, and you may need to adjust it regularly, monitor side effects. Here's an excellent resource by Attitude Magazine, which is actually, if you have kids with ADHD or you have ADHD, Attitude Magazine is a great magazine to subscribe to. They have all sorts of really helpful articles and very, very to the point. Like, here are some problems, here are some solutions. All right. Just something about ADHD medicines in general here. It's a nice little graphic here. If you look at the top right here, where it says you get the 31%, 13%, et cetera. So you got about 43% that are on medicine only. You've got 31% who do a combination of medicine and therapy, which is considered the most effective combination for most people, at least initially. 13% get behavior therapy only. And usually those are for milder cases of ADHD. Behavior therapy is generally not going to help a kid who is so hyperactive that they can't sit still no matter what. Then you've got 13% no treatment. We got the stimulants, which I mentioned, first line of defense. Then you get the non-stimulants, which are usually second, and sometimes use a combination. So finding the right dosage is important. And it's not always based on gender, age, or severity of symptoms. Everybody's sort of individual. Okay, it depends partly on how the medication is metabolized by your system, how efficiently it's absorbed by the body. Usually what we do with medications is you start low and go slow, okay? What you should look for if medicines are working is sustained focus, improved mood, better attention to detail, better working memory, and reduced impulsivity. If you're having negative side effects, sometimes they go away, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you need a dose adjustment or a timing adjustment. With the stimulants, the main side effects are sleep disturbance. It makes some people more aggressive or anxious, and appetite disturbance was probably the most important thing, or most common symptom that or side effect that people complain about. So if you are going to consider medication for your child, don't be afraid to ask the prescriber, hey, why are you choosing this medication? What are the pros and cons? Are there any side effects I need to look out for? Don't be afraid to ask. And also to ask, hey, what do I do if I see some side effects that are not good, that I'm concerned about? How do I get a hold of you? Because some things you may need to stop. I've had kids who've started having suicidal thoughts on medication. It's very rare, but it happens. This is something where, you need to stop it immediately. And it just went away. So, again, it's very rare. And you should always check with know how to reach your prescriber so that you can take care of anything like that. Can you relate here again? Jeremy, you can't procrastinate like this on your schoolwork. Well, why not? You see he's on his phone, if you notice. It's too much pressure. Well, I work best under pressure. I mean, it's too much pressure on me because the mom is worried about last minute stuff. One of the things about last minute sort of procrastinating that might be helpful for you to sort of understand it is that, and not be so upset about it, is that when you procrastinate to the last minute, what happens is you realize I'm running out of time. And sometimes that pressure helps compensate for the lack of dopamine. And that's when people get stuff done. You probably know people in college, maybe yourself, maybe somebody you've seen, pulling all-nighters. Usually that happens because they procrastinated. And some people can find, do fine with that. The problem with it is then you can't predict how much time it's going to take. And so it may end up taking more time. And as a parent, you can set some limits on that. You can say, hey, I'm available till 9 o'clock at night to help you with homework. If at 10:30 I see you up in your room and you're doing something last minute, I need to sleep. So I'm going to wish you well on that. Good luck. And I'm going to go to sleep, as opposed to parents that I've worked with who will stay up late typing their child's term paper because they've waited till the last minute. So, and again, you have to think about, if you do that, what does that teach your child? You're preventing them from experiencing a consequence of their actions, and they need that to learn. Typical parents getting overwhelmed. I'm sure you all can relate to this. So let me talk about, this is the last thing I want to talk about, is dealing with your frustrations. Again, parenting is stressful in and of itself. Parenting a child with ADHD is even more stressful. So one of the things that's really important is to not make everything about school. And that can be difficult to do, but I've seen kids get depressed and even suicidally depressed when the parents harp so much on school that the kid feels like, I can't ever be successful. And, they're always on my case about everything. You get a sense of hopelessness sometimes. And so you don't want to make everything about school. You want to focus on things at home. I think that's also why an incentive system can be helpful at home, is that even if they're struggling in school, they can still earn some privileges for doing good things at home. Okay. You need to be realistic in your expectations. Like I said, medicine doesn't work. It doesn't cure it. It helps, but it doesn't help everything. So you have to recognize, if you recognize that there are going to be ups and downs, that your child is going to occasionally get overwhelmed, may say things that aren't very nice, that you need to, when you realize that that's going to happen, and that your job as a parent isn't to punish them for saying mean things to you, but your job is to teach them how to express their anger appropriately, because it's difficult because of that impulsivity. You want to pick and choose your battles carefully. Again, some little things aren't that important. I have some parents who get upset because their kids can't sit still at dinner. Let them stand up. There's no problem with, there's nothing about that. If it's better that way, great. If they have one of those like bouncy balls where you can sort of bounce on the ball as you're eating, that'd be fine as well. Sometimes you just don't like, kids may be able to sit still for 5 or 10 minutes and then they're done. That's okay as well. If it's that important to you, you can work on it. You can have an incentive, but sometimes you just have to let the little things go because they're not important. If you battle with your kids on every little thing, it's not going to go well. They're going to be frustrated. You're going to be frustrated. And then that level of frustration really can zap your motivation to try to make it better. Letting your child make some mistakes, it's not the end of the world. Missing an assignment, forgetting your lunch, all those things happen. They don't need reminders from you or a lecture about, I told you not to forget that. It's much better to say, hey, listen, I can see how upset and disappointed you are. You worked so hard on that and you left it at home. I can see where that would happen. How do you want to handle this differently in the future so that doesn't happen? We've all learned from making mistakes. Avoid helicopter parenting, easier said than done. I do recognize that. But as much as possible, you want to really try to stay on top of that and not overfunction, because what a helicopter parent conveys unintentionally to a child is that you are not capable of managing your own affairs. You need me to hover over you, waiting for you to fail so I can rescue you. That's not your intent, but that is the message that it gives. So yes, I understand that's going to be anxiety provoking if certain things don't get done. And there's going to be times where you're going to overfocus. For example, college application deadlines. If you know your child has a hard time with those deadlines, I think it's okay to step in and say, hey, this is really important because the consequences are severe. So, I'm going to help you with this to make sure that it gets done. Maintaining a sense of humor, really important. stuff like this happens. Humor helps everything go better. It doesn't mean that you're minimizing everything, but sometimes the things that kids say and do are pretty funny. And if you can sort of laugh about it sometimes, and learn not to take yourself too seriously and teach your child the same, it can make it easier to deal with the frustrations of ADHD. You want to seek support for yourself when needed, okay? This is difficult. This is hard work. Everybody needs a break from that. And so that's why also in therapy, it's important to be a part of your child's therapy if your child is in therapy. I know some therapists tend to just see the kids and they don't really see the adults. I've never been a fan of that. I always include parents in part of the sessions because I recognize that you guys need help as well. And so sometimes they'll just meet with the parents and not the child, just because we can strategize a little bit and we don't have to worry about hurting your child's feelings. But that way you kind of get your own frustrations, out. If you have a disorder, if you have depression, anxiety, ADHD yourself, being treated for those can help you be more effective as parents. So keep that in mind as well. Leave you with a final cartoon here. This room, you probably can relate just to how messy it can be. That's obviously an extreme, but you'll find people whose rooms aren't like that. All right. Yeah. All right. To summarize here, parenting a child with ADHD is a lot of work. Okay. Again, if you have ADHD or other issues, you're going to struggle more. Get help for yourself. You're not going to have a clean house or perfect household. Okay. Your kids' grades are going to bounce around. You can't take responsibility for your child's successes or failures. So keep that in mind as well. Your child's performance should never take priority over your love for your child. Okay. When that happens and it turns negative, it's much harder to treat at that point because so much negativity has happened. It will get better. Therapy works. Medication helps. Participate in your child's therapy. If something's not going well, problem solve. Figure out some better solutions. You want to look for the positives and celebrate your successes when they happen, because they will happen. Maybe not as frequently as you'd like to have them happen, but yeah. All right. I think. All right. So for some more information, you can check out these resources. And these are some very good resources you can look at: medications, some parenting strategies. At the bottom is my website address, jamesjchrist.com. You can listen to some podcasts of other parenting talks I've given that might be helpful to you. You can actually order some of my books through that website. It'll take you to Free Spirit Publishing. They're the ones that publish the majority of my books, though the ADHD book is published by Child's Work, Child's Play. And let's see, here's my contact information. So feel free to reach out. As I said earlier, if you want a copy of the slides, feel free to email me at drjchrist@aol.com. Our CFC website has a lot of different resources: educational, mental health, parenting, substance abuse, addictions, things like that. So thank you very much. And I hope you've learned some useful information here. Take care.